I'm going to get into the limited amount of time we have left. We only have about 10 minutes left. I want to get into some of these other explanations, okay? Or at least make you aware of them so you can kind of see where this conversation goes. Because I find at this point, some people are like, well, if atheists and people like airmen are agreeing with so much of this stuff, then again, why don't they think Jesus really rose from the dead? How do they explain this away? And I want you to see some of those things, okay? So with that in mind, we're going to skip number 7. But that is stuff you can find on our Convincing Proof website and the Convincing Proof YouTube channel. And what I want to get to is number 8. And these are the alternate explanations. And maybe you've heard them before, but these are then, what Ehrman or Gerd Ludemann and others who agree that there's good early accounts of Jesus' resurrection. How do they explain them away? And they will often explain them away by proposing alternate explanations. They will say things like, well, maybe they hallucinated when they supposedly saw Jesus' resurrected body, that was a group hallucination. And so these alternate explanations are what are proposed. And what we go through here in this 8th and final step then is to consider some of these alternate explanations and just to show that they don't line up with the historical facts. They just do not line up with the historical facts, as well as an actual literal bodily resurrection. So in other words, Jesus is actually rising from the dead, literally and bodily, is what best accounts for all the historical facts. And this is kind of a long, drawn-out process that various, now of course, Christian historians go through as they're making the case that the resurrection of Jesus best explains all of these facts. Before we start looking at those, and again we only have 10 minutes just to kind of run through how this process works, I do want to let you know about this myth that you'll see from time to time. Maybe you've heard about it before. If you deal in these subjects online at all, this is going to be one of the first objections you hear. This idea that Jesus' resurrection was just based on ancient pagan myths that the disciples just copied as they invented their story of Jesus rising from the dead. But I want to show how Ehrman knocks this objection out of the water, because it's just, at this point, it's pretty ridiculous. But take a look at how Ehrman deals with this. Ehrman wrote, one of the most widely asserted claims found in the mythicist literature is that Jesus was an invention of the early Christians who had been deeply influenced by the prevalent notion of a dying, rising God, as found throughout the pagan religions of antiquity. The theory behind this claim is that people in many ancient religions worshiped gods who died and rose again, etc., Osiris, Attis, Adonais, etc., etc. But look how Ehrman responds to this. He says, even though most mythicists don't appear to know about it, the one-time commonly held view that dying and rising gods were widespread in pagan antiquity has fallen on hard times among scholars. The category of dying and rising gods, once a major topic of scholarly investigation, must be understood to have been largely a misnomer based on imaginative reconstructions in exceedingly late or highly ambiguous texts. This is Ehrman writing this out now. He's quoting Mark Smith, a scholar who specializes in this area. Moreover, Smith emphasizes a good deal of our information about these other gods comes from sources that date from a period after the rise of Christianity, writers who themselves were actually influenced by Christian ideas, who often then received their information secondhand. One major question, as we'll see as he goes through this, is whether there even was a common mythology of dying and rising gods. Moreover, even if there was, it stretches credulity to think that such a mythology, if it even existed, played any role in the world of Jesus' earliest Jewish followers in Palestine. To Paul, Jesus was not a dying, rising God like those discussed among the pagans, and if in fact there was such a pagan view at all. So this, even though it's still popular, you'll see it online from time to time, that it was just a myth developed to copy these pagan ideas. Ehrman points out historically that scholars just don't even pay attention to that anymore. Okay, I want to direct you to a particular scholar that specializes in Jesus' resurrection. This is a gentleman known by Gary Habermas. You might be familiar with him. He has spent the last 30, probably 40 years now, and developed himself as one of the leading experts when it comes to the historical investigation of Jesus' resurrection. And what Habermas is really good at is taking some of these alternate explanations of his resurrection, like group hallucination. Jesus didn't really die on the cross, he just passed out, and then somebody got him all healed up, looking better in a few days, and then the disciples saw him and thought that he rose from the dead. All those alternate explanations. And what Gary is really good about doing is showing how all of those alternate explanations just don't measure up with the facts. They just don't meet the historical criteria as well as Jesus' literal bodily resurrection. It's very easy to come up with conspiracy theories, right? I mean, it's so simple. Anybody can say, well, is it possible that Jesus had a twin brother and Jesus' twin brother died on the cross, but he really didn't? And so when the disciples saw him 3 days later, they thought that he rose from the dead because it was his twin brother. Anybody, is that possible? Of course that's possible. But look, do you have any historical evidence for that whatsoever? Do you have any first century accounts of him having a twin brother? Do you have historical eyewitnesses that go back to within 2 to 3 years of his death, like we do on our side? It's so easy to come up with the possibility. Look, we don't win the argument, we don't win the conversation if we say, is it possible he rose from the dead? Well, of course it's possible, but is there good historical evidence for your theory? In this case, your conspiracy theory. So what Gary Habermas is really good at doing is laying out all the historical facts that all scholars affirm, all scholars agree to, and then walking through the different theories, right? And showing how they just don't measure up with the facts. So here's one of the theories out there, right? This is one of the earliest theories, that the disciples stole Jesus' body while the guards slept. And this theory goes back even to the New Testament, right? This is talked about, that the Jewish leaders claimed this from the very beginning. Now, interestingly, we can note that the enemies agree that the tomb was empty. So we have enemy attestation that there was an empty tomb. They don't deny that evidence of an empty tomb, but they offered a natural explanation. But does it fit the facts? And this is what a lot of Gary Habermas's work does. He looks through these alternate explanations and shows how they just don't fit the facts. So, for example, this idea that Jesus' body was stolen doesn't fit these facts. These are facts as Gary lays them out. He calls them the minimal facts that all scholars agree to. This conspiracy theory, this alternate explanation, doesn't fit these facts. Now, what's really exciting about Gary's work, and I would encourage you to have at least one book by Gary Habermas on your shelf. He's got all sorts of books that he's written over the years, decades really. Some at the very high academic level. He is a historical scholar, but some at the popular level as well. So he's one of those rare breeds that can write and do good work at the academic level and the popular level. So it's good to have a source by him in your own home so you can walk through some of these alternate explanations. What's really exciting is that what Gary is doing now is he's writing his magnum opus. So he's done this historical work for 40 years and he's written several books about it, but he wanted to really put all of his historical research in one resource, all of his work into one collection, and it's actually a 4-volume work that's being published right now The first volume just came out in January of this year, and the next volume, I think there'll be a volume released every year. Each volume is about 1,000 pages. So we're talking, when it's all said and done, we'll have 4,000 pages of his investigative historical work. Over the decades, he's done his work, laying out all the historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection, all these alternative explanations and how they don't fit the facts. So a very, very great resource that is going to be important. Interestingly, the publisher asked me to be the substance editor for these volumes. And so I've been reading these volumes before they were published and editing some of them. Now, I'm not a historian. They didn't ask me to edit them because I know all these historical facts and I can correct Gary on these historical facts. But they asked me because I'm more of a philosopher and work more with argumentation. And so I'm evaluating how he lays out his arguments and making sure that they follow good form, so on and so forth. So I've been really excited to read these volumes ahead of time. I've edited the first 2 volumes, so I edit them usually about a year and a half before they're actually published. So it's kind of exciting for me to read through his material before it gets out to the public. But the first volume is now available. You can buy it Amazon, wherever. But he walks through these other explanations, like the disciples went to the wrong tomb. We could talk about, I mentioned this alternative explanation, he didn't really die, he just swooned on the cross, how that doesn't really line up with the historical facts. The hallucination alternative explanation. So again, Gary Habermas's work is a great resource on that. And we go through, I've got whole lectures and series on the YouTube channel and the Convincing Proof website where I walk through these alternate explanations and point out how they don't measure up with the good historical facts that we have.